Irish connections. Got 2 samples discovered in 2020, and they are both my direct lines. They're both males that are being found, but the mtDNA is exactly the same as mine, G1C3. These are relatives, sharing the same mother line. So this was, the first one I'm looking at is Carrowkeel 532. So if you are a G1C3, listen up. So Carrowkeel 5321, also catalogued as CAK 532, is an ancient human DNA sample sequenced in a landmark 2020 archaeogenetic study led by Dr. Laura Cassidy and published in Nature, titled A Dynastic Elite in Monumental Neolithic Society. And here's what it says about the profile. So the genetic profile and profile data: sex, male; location, Carrowkeel Megalithic Cemetery, County Sligo, Ireland; era, age, late Neolithic period, radiocarbon dated to approximately 3014 to 2891. I don't know what that is. Cal BC. Y chromosome haplogroup, the paternal line, IY3709, a subclade under IM284. Characteristics of indigenous northwestern Europe hunter-gatherer descendants integrated into early farming societies. The mitochondrial haplogroup, maternal line, J1C3. The historical and scientific significance of this find: the Neolithic God Kings dynasty. The 2020 Cassidy et al. Study famously discovered that an elite male buried at the massive New Grange Passage tomb was the product of first-degree incest. Parents were either siblings or parent-child. The Intertomb Network, the genome of Carrowkeel, revealed a key genetic connection. He was found to share a kinship coefficient, and then it's got in brackets sixth degree, with the high status individual from the main chamber at New Grange, sample NG10. Evidence of a ruling class. This genetic link proved that the monumental passage tombs across Ireland, New Grange in the east and Carrowmore and Carrowkeel in the west, were not just isolated regional graves. Instead, they were reserved for a highly interconnected, island-wide ruling elite or dynastic family that controlled labour and monumental architecture across Ireland. Wowza. And the second one discovered in this Cassidy thing, the Millin Bay or MB6 sample, another ancient human genome sequence from the Millin Bay megalithic monument in County Down, Northern Ireland. This data was published in a landmark 2020 genome-wide study by Dr. Laura Cassidy, and that is in the journal Nature, which uncovered a dynastic elite class in Neolithic Ireland. So key characteristics of sample MB6, another male. Location, Millin Bay, Keentar, Townland, County Down. Chronological age, Middle Neolithic, radiocarbon dated to roughly 3495 to 3040 Cal BC. Y chromosome, I-L1193. Mitochondrial, which is the mother line, J1C3. Archaeological and genetic significance, elite kinship network. Genome-wide analysis showed that individual MB6 was biologically related, sharing a 6th degree kinship or more distant cousinship to NG10, the famous elite individual buried in the main chamber of the New Grange Passage tomb. NG10 was the product of a first degree incestuous union, ruling elite. Widespread social structure. The genetic links between MB6, County Down, New Grange, County Meath, and other individuals from the Carrowmore and Carrowkeel complexes, County Sligo, confirmed that an elite, highly connected socio-religious kinship group spanned hundreds of kilometres across Neolithic Island. Site context. The Millin Bay site has historically been viewed by archaeologists as an atypical monument due to its distinct architecture and above-ground settings. However, its association with Carrowkeel style pottery, passage tomb artwork, and now direct genetic data firmly cements its ties to the broader Irish passage tomb tradition. Oh, the Carrowkeel megalithic cemetery. I've searched to see what would this man have looked like, my distant relative. So what it says here is, based on modern ancient DNA analysis and osteological studies of the human remains from Cairn K at the Carrowkeel megalithic cemetery, specifically the sample CAK532, a male who lived around 3000 BCE. He belonged to the early wave of farming communities in Ireland, whose ancestral lineages migrated from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, through the Mediterranean before arriving in Western Europe. Consequently, his appearance would look far more Mediterranean than the fair-skinned, blue-eyed population associated with modern Ireland. Pigmentation and facial features: his skin tone, light brown or olive skin. He didn't possess the specific genetic variants for hyper fair skin that developed later in Irish history during the Bronze Age. His hair and eyes: he had dark brown or black hair and brown eyes. His facial structure: skeletal analysis of the Carrowkeel crania shows they were leptoprosopic, meaning he had a narrow, elongated face with a high nasal skeleton, a prominent nose. His skull shape was ovoid and pentagonoid when viewed from behind. Stature and build: he stood approximately 5 foot 6.5 inches, which was the calculated average height for males excavated at that site. His build: he had a lean, physically active build typical of early agriculturists who engaged in cattle farming and manual labour. However, his joints may have shown early signs of wear. Several adult skeletons from these tombs showed markers of rheumatoid or degenerative joint disease. And under this guy, it says that this was one of 12. Where have I written that? One of 12 samples of the same branch. Social status and kinship: the megalithic elite CAK532 was buried in a prominent passage tomb, Cairn K. Genetic mapping by Trinity College Dublin revealed that he was distantly related to the famous elite male buried at Newgrange. This indicates he belonged to a powerful, interconnected ruling lineage that spanned across Neolithic Ireland. So looking at this sample, the person, the man, the archaeological discoveries at the Carrowkeel have fundamentally reshaped our understanding of prehistoric life. Recent bioarchaeological studies on human remains, including those of the Neolithic man, CAK532, reveal a community that practiced complex, highly ritualized funerary procedures and consumed a highly privileged, resource-rich diet. So the burial practices, deconstruction of the dead. For over a century, historians believed the bones inside Carrowkeel's passage tombs were simply placed there after cremation. However, a landmark bioarchaeological study led by Dr. Johnny Geber, published in Bioarchaeology International, analysed the 5,300-year-old skeletal fragments and discovered a far more intricate layered ritual landscape. 5,300 years old. Dismemberment and flesh removal. Researchers discovered unmistakable cut marks from stone tools located precisely where tendons and ligaments attached to major joints, such as shoulders, hips, elbows, ankles. This proves that the community actively dismembered and defleshed the bodies of the dead. body processing. The funerary rite was a deliberate process of deconstructing the human body. Anthropologists believe this was a spiritual necessity, handled by kin to help the deceased soul transition into the next stage of existence. Cremation and commingling. Following dismemberment, some bones were burned on outdoor funeral pyres, while others were left unburnt. Both types were then brought into the stone chambers of the passage tombs, where they were commingled, blending individual identities into a collective ancestor pool. Grave offerings. The dead were laid to rest alongside unique items, including bone and antler pins, stone beads, pendants, and a distinct style of thick, heavily decorated pottery, now officially classed by archaeologists as Carrowkeel ware. The diet and megalithic elite menu, stable isotope analysis provides a detailed record of what this man ate during his lifetime. Because CAK532 sample, the man, was genetically tied to an elite dynastic lineage, his diet reflects immense privilege compared to ordinary lower status Neolithic farmers. Heavy terrestrial meat consumption. His bones show exceptionally high nitrogen values. This profile is a classic marker of a high trophic diet, meaning the consumed massive amounts of terrestrial meat like beef, pork and mutton, and animal products like dairy. Agricultural crops. His animal protein intake was supplemented by cultivated grains, primarily barley and wheat, which were ground into a flour using stone quern stones found at nearby habitation sites. The marine paradox. Despite the Carrowkeel complex being situated relatively close to the Sligo coast, stable carbon isotope signatures show that he and his elite peers ate almost no marine fish or seafood. Their diet was strictly tied to land-based livestock, reinforcing their status as pastoral masters who controlled vast herds of cattle. While Newgrange is a world famous for its winter solstice alignment, the Carrowkeel megalithic cemetery tracks the completely opposite end of the solar calendar. The K&G roof box, just like Newgrange, K&G at Carrowkeel features a rare, highly specialised engineering marvel known as a roof box. This is a deliberate opening constructed just above the main entrance lintel stone. The summer solstice sunset, the passage of K&G faces the northwest. Every year around the 21st of June, the summer solstice, the setting sun aligns perfectly with the monument. A golden beam of sunlight pierces through the roof box, travelling down the stone passage to dramatically illuminate the dark, cruciform rear chamber. Predating Newgrange, archaeologists estimate that the solar-aligned roof box at Carrowkeel was built around 3500 BCE. This makes it roughly 300 years older than the roof box at Newgrange, proving that Western Irish communities mastered celestial engineering long before the Eastern monuments were built. So the genetic relationship to the Newgrange elite. The landmark ancient DNA study led by Trinity College Dublin mapped 44 Neolithic Irish genomes, revealing that CAK532 was part of a powerful island-wide dynasty family. So the extended family. So in Carrowkeel, we've got elite male farmer, light brown skin, dark hair. Newgrange, incestuous male, son of sibling stroke parent union. Distant elite cousins. The aDNA analysis showed that my guy, the CAK532, shared a direct multi-generational kinship with the adult male discovered in the deepest recesses of the New Grange monument. They were part of the same patriarchal chain. That's the fatherland, know that. The incest link. The New Grange male was the biological son of a first-degree incestuous union, either brother-sister or parent-child. In ancient history, breaking the universal incest taboo is almost exclusively seen in absolute royal dynasties like the Egyptian pharaohs or Inca god kings to keep power and divine bloodlines strictly contained. A countrywide network. The fact that CAK 532, buried in Sligo, was biologically related to the New Grange elite buried in Meath proves that this specific family line controlled the major ritual landscapes across the entire island of Ireland. They effectively marshalled the massive labour of local populations to build these vast stone monuments. Wow. So what happened? What happened to this elite dynasty? It vanished completely due to a massive, rapid genetic and cultural replacement during the transition to the Bronze Age. Around 2500 BCE, just a few centuries after the height of the Passage tomb builders, a new population known as the Belbeca culture arrived in Ireland from continental Europe. Within a remarkably short time frame, they transformed the island permanently. Total genetic replacement. The 90% turnover. Wow. Landmark ancient DNA studies published in Nature reveal that the incoming Belbeca migrants completely overwhelmed the indigenous population. Over a span of just a few generations, at least 90% of Ireland's Neolithic gene pool vanished. Extinction of the elite lineage. The patriarchal, closely inbred dynastic lineage of CAK 532 and the New Grange elite was abruptly cut short. Their Y chromosome lineages disappeared from the archaeological record and were entirely replaced by continental Europe DNA haplogroups. A change in appearance. The incoming Bronze Age populations brought the specific genetic variations for fair skin, blue eyes, and red blonde hair. This completely replaced the olive-skinned, dark-hair Mediterranean profile of the CAK 532's people. Those elite. Why did the dynasty collapse? Well, archaeologists and genetics point to three major factors that caused the sudden collapse of this 5,000-year-old elite class. The introduction of plague. The Belbeca migrants originated from the river deltas of northwestern Europe and the Eurasian steppe. So, carrying immunity to deadly pathogens, it's highly likely they introduced diseases like the plague to Ireland. Because the Neolithic Irish population had lived in geographic isolation for millennia, they lacked immunity, leading to catastrophic pandemics. Technological disruption. The elite class maintained power by controlling the ideological and ritual calendar via monumental stone architecture. The Belbecas brought metallurgy, copper and gold smelting, and advanced weaponry. This metal revolution completely shattered the old economic and social hierarchies built on stone tools and collective labour. Ideological shift. The massive collective passage tombs of Carrowkeel and New Grange were abruptly abandoned. The new Bronze Age society rejected the collective ancestor pools and elite god kings. Instead, they shifted toward individualistic burials, placing single bodies in small stone boxes, accompanied by personalised goods like copper daggers and distinctive bell-shaped pottery. Echoes in Irish mythology. Intriguingly, this violent historic shift is mirrored in medieval Irish folklore. The Book of Invasions records how a magical monument-building race called the Tuatha De Danann, who ruled from places like Newgrange, Brunabonne, were completely defeated and driven underground by a newer wave of invaders called the Milesians. Modern genetics has proved that this mythical replacement was a literal historical fact. So I've looked up Tuatha De Danann because I've heard that before. So translated as the folk or tribe of the goddess Danu. So in Celtic mythology, Danu has never been a human. She's a primordial deity, meaning she existed before humanity and represents the fundamental elements of the cosmos. Why she's not human? Divine matriarch, she's the most immortal mother of the Tuatha De Danann, a race of supernatural beings and gods, not mortal people. Elemental force, she embodies the earth and flowing water itself, rather than a historical person who was later turned into a god. No mortal lifespan. Unlike human heroes in Irish myth, Danu has no birth or death narrative in the folklore. When Christian monks finally wrote down the oral Irish myths centuries later, they tried to alter the stories. They often reframed the old gods as ancient, highly advanced human kings, queens, or magicians to fit Christian teachings. However, in the original pagan belief system, Danu was purely a cosmic, divine entity. When Christian monks finally began writing down Ireland's oral history in text like the Labor Gabor, Éireann, the Book of Invasions, they stripped away the outright status of gods to fit Christian theology. Instead, they reframed the Tuatha De Danann as an incredibly advanced, magical fifth wave of ancient invaders. The connection to Carrowkeel and Newgrange. For centuries, historians viewed the stories of the Tuatha De Danann as pure fantasy. However, modern archaeology has shown that these myths were actually the oral memory of Ireland's Neolithic passage tomb builders, the very society to which CAK 532 belonged. Tombs as palaces. In Irish mythology, monuments like Newgrange, known as Sid in Brogga, and the Carrowkeel mounds were not treated as mere burial sites. They were feared and revered as the living palaces of the gods, gateways where the Tuatha De Danann could freely cross between our world and the other world. The Dagda, the supreme ruler and all-father of the Tuatha De Danann, a deity known as the Dagda, was said to personally own and inhabit the palace of Newgrange. Is this Aengus Og? According to myth, the Dagda stopped time for 9 months so he could father a son, Aengus Og, the god of youth and love. With the river goddess Boan, Angus was famously associated with the winter solstice sunbeam that illuminates the tomb. Famous figures of the pantheon. The tribe featured some of the most iconic characters in Celtic lore. Lugh of the Long Arm, the ultimate warrior god of light, sun, and mastery of all arts, he led the tribe to victory against their monstrous rivals, the Fomorians. Nuada of the Silver Hand, the great high king of the Tuatha De Danann. After losing his arm in battle, he was temporarily disqualified from kingship until a healer forged him a fully functioning, magical replacement arm made of pure silver. The Morrigan, the terrifying shape-shifting goddess of war, fate, and death, who frequently appeared on the battlefield in the form of a hooded crow. How they became fairies. According to the Book of Invasions, the reign of the Tuatha De Danann came to a sudden end when the Milesians, the Iron Age Celts, who represent modern humans, invaded Ireland. The two forces fought and the Celts ultimately won. Rather than being slaughtered, the Tuatha De Danann agreed to divide the island. The Celts claimed the surface world, while the gods agreed to retreat completely underground into the hollow hills and prehistoric stone mounds. Over millennia, the phase of these mounds, Sidi, She, pronounced she, it was Sidhe, pronounced she, became entirely entwined with the gods themselves. As the centuries pass, the memory of these powerful Neolithic god kings faded and evolved in a popular Irish folklore into the Oisai, the people of the mounds, better known globally today as the Irish fairies or leprechauns. Wow. So I've asked, how does legend connect with actual fact? So the connection between Irish legends and archaeological facts is the survival of an ultra long-term oral memory. For millennia, communities passed down stories about the monuments and people of the past. When medieval Christian monks finally wrote these tales down in the 11th century, the stories had become mythologized, but they still contained a shocking amount of accuracy, literal historic data that modern science has only recently verified. Like the legend tales of the Tuatha De Danann, align perfectly with the physical realities found in Irish soil. The myth of the underground dwellers versus the fact of the tombs. The legend, after being defeated by the human invaders, the Milesians, the Tuatha De Danann withdrew into the Siri, the hollow, the sacred mounds. Myths state that individual gods owned specific mounds. For instance, the supreme god, the Dagda, lived inside Newgrange. The archaeological fact: the mounds are real, highly sophisticated stone structures. Genetic mapping of the skeleton inside the deepest chamber of Newgrange proved he belonged to an incredibly powerful elite family dynasty that ruled Ireland. The folklore correctly remembered that these precise monuments belonged to a literal, highly exclusive class of rulers who were separate from the rest of society. The myth of the Battle of Moytura versus the fact of Carrowkeel's geography. The legend, the great epic of Irish mythology, is the Second Battle of Moytura. In this story, the Tuatha De Danann fought a catastrophic, bloody war against the monstrous Fomorians for control of Ireland. The legend explicitly states this battle took place in County Sligo, right alongside the Carrowkeel Mounds. Archaeological facts. The Carrowkeel megalithic complex is surrounded by one of the largest concentrations of prehistoric stone weapons and massive burial cairns in Europe. Furthermore, Dr. Johnny Gerber's osteological analysis found that the human bones inside the Carrowkeel tombs had been forcibly dismembered, fractured, and processed with stone tools. The ancient oral memory preserved a chaotic history of mass violence, physical trauma, and elite burial rites, framing it as a war of the gods. The myth of solar control versus the fact of archaeoastronomy. The legend. The Tuatha De Danann was said to possess cosmic powers. Myth dictates that the Dagda had absolute control over the sun, famously forcing the sun to stand still in the sky for 9 months so that his son, Angus, could be born. The archaeological fact. The Neolithic builders possessed a flawless understanding of astronomy. Cairns at Carrowkeel, like Cairn G, and monuments like Newgrange were specifically engineered with narrow stone pathways and roof boxes. These architectures literally capture, channel, and manipulate sunlight, making the sunbeam stand still at the back of a dark tomb on the exact day of the solstices. The myth of sudden genetic replacement. The legend, the Book of Invasion, states that the old monument building rulers did not slowly fade away. They were suddenly and completely overthrown by a brand new wave of invaders, modern humans, who changes the language, technology, and culture of Ireland. The archaeological facts. Ancient DNA studies published in Nature proved that a sudden, massive migration event occurred around 2500 BCE. The incoming Bell-Beaker people completely replaced 90% of the indigenous Neolithic DNA within just a few generations. The legends perfectly recorded a real catastrophic genetic turnover.